You know, I was sitting at my kitchen table last Thursday morning, drinking my coffee and watching the news, when my daughter called. She was upset about something her teenage son had done, going on and on about how she'd tried to explain things to him, how she'd set boundaries, how she'd given him every opportunity to make the right choice. And I just listened. I didn't offer much advice. I didn't jump in with solutions. I just said, "I understand, honey. That sounds hard." After we hung up, I sat there for a long moment, and it hit me like a thunderbolt. I sounded exactly like my father. Growing up, I thought my parents were the most frustrating people on earth. They never seemed to have opinions about anything. When I come to them with problems, excited or angry or confused about something, they'd just nod. They'd say things like, or, "Well, that's life," or "You'll figure it out." I used to think they didn't care. I thought they were checked out, maybe even a little cold. I remember being 25 years old, standing in their living room, practically begging my father to tell me what he thought I should do about a job offer, and he just shrugged and said, "Son, you're going to do whatever you think is best anyway." It drove me absolutely crazy. But here I am at 70, and I finally get it. I finally understand why my parents were so quiet. And today, I want to talk about this because I think it's one of the most profound things that happens as we age, something nobody warns you about. There comes a point when you stop talking so much, not because you don't care, not because you've given up, but because you've learned things that can only be learned through decades of living. When did this shift happen for me? I can't point to a single moment, but somewhere between 60 and 70, I noticed myself doing it, biting my tongue, letting conversations go, choosing silence when the old me would have jumped right in with my 2 cents. At first, I worried I was becoming one of those bitter old men who just stops engaging with the world. You know the type. Sitting in the corner at family gatherings, not saying much, just watching. Didn't want to be that person. But then I started paying attention to why I was staying quiet, and I realized something important. I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because I'd finally learned what was worth saying and what wasn't. I'd learned that some battles aren't worth fighting, that some advice falls on deaf ears, no matter how right you are, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people make their own mistakes. My parents knew this at 50. It took me until 70. And I think this is one of those experiences that unites so many of us at this age. If you're watching this and you're in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You've probably noticed yourself becoming quieter too. Maybe your kids have even commented on it. "Dad, you used to have an opinion about everything. Now you just shrug." Or maybe you've caught yourself sounding like your own parents, and it's unsettling and comforting all at once. There's a wisdom that comes with age that actually makes you talk less, not more. And today, I want to explore why that is, what I've learned that's made me quieter, and why I think this might actually be one of the greatest gifts of getting older. Let me start with the most important thing I've learned that's made me quieter. Most arguments aren't about what you think they're about. When I was younger, if someone said something I disagreed with, I'd jump right in. Politics, religion, how to raise kids, the right way to fix a car, you name it. I thought every disagreement was an opportunity to share what I knew, to correct misinformation, to help someone see things the right way. My way, usually. But at 70, I've had enough arguments to know how they really work. That political debate at Thanksgiving, it's not really about policy. It's about your nephew feeling dismissed by the older generation and trying to prove he's smart. That disagreement with your daughter about how she's raising her kids, it's not about the actual parenting choice. It's about her needing to establish that she's the parent now, Not you. When you're young, you think arguments are about facts and ideas. When you're older, you realize they're almost always about feelings and identity. My father understood this. I remember when I was 32, I'd just bought my first house, and I was so proud. I called him up to tell him about it, and mentioned I was going to knock down a wall between the kitchen and the living room. He'd been a contractor his whole life. He knew houses inside and out, and I could tell by the pause on the phone that he thought it was a bad idea. But you know what he said? "That sounds nice, son. Send me pictures when it's done." That was it. No lecture about load-bearing walls. No let me tell you why that won't work. Just support. It wasn't until years later, after I'd paid a fortune to fix the structural issues I'd created, that I understood what he'd done. He'd let me learn. He'd chosen the relationship over being right. Now I do the same thing. My son-in-law mentioned he's thinking about starting a business that I can tell from experience probably won't work. The old me would have laid out all the reasons why. The 70-year-old me said, "That's exciting. I hope it goes well." Because I've learned that unsolicited advice, even good advice, usually just creates resentment. People don't want to be told what to do. They want to be supported while they figure it out themselves. My silence now is more loving than my words ever were. Here's the second thing that's made me quieter. You realize how little you actually know. I know that sounds strange. You'd think after 70 years on this planet, I'd feel like I know everything. But it's the opposite. The more I've experienced, the more I've realized how complicated life is, how many exceptions there are to every rule, how often the things I was certain about turned out to be wrong. When I was 40, I knew exactly how everyone should live their lives. I knew the right way to save money, the right way to discipline children, the right way to maintain a marriage, the right way to stay healthy. I had answers for everything. Now at 70, I mostly have questions. I've seen too many contradictions. I've watched people do everything right and still end up miserable. I've watched people break every rule and end up happy. I've seen marriages that should have lasted end in divorce, and marriages that looked doomed somehow make it 50 years. Life is so much stranger and more unpredictable than I ever imagined. There's a humility that comes with age, if you're paying attention. You realize that the universe is bigger and more mysterious than your understanding of it. You realize that what worked for you might not work for someone else. You realize that the advice that saved your life might ruin someone else's. So you get quieter. Not because you're uncertain about everything, but because you're more honest about the limits of your knowledge. I had a friend, George, who passed away a few years ago at 78. Smartest man I ever knew, ran a successful business, raised 4 kids who all turned out great, was married to the same woman for 55 years. Near the end of his life, his grandson asked him what the secret to a good life was. You know what George said? "I have no idea. I did my best and got lucky." His grandson was disappointed. He wanted a formula, a roadmap, 5 steps to success. But George was just being honest. He'd lived long enough to know that certainty is for the young. Wisdom is knowing how much you don't know. The third thing I've learned is that most problems solve themselves if you wait long enough. This one took me the longest to understand, and it goes against everything we're taught when we're young. When you're young, you're supposed to be a problem solver. You're supposed to take action, make things happen, fix what's broken. And sometimes that's right. But sometimes, and this is what age teaches you, the best thing you can do is absolutely nothing. I spent so many years of my life rushing in to solve problems that didn't need solving. My adult daughter would call upset about her marriage, and I'd immediately start suggesting counselors or books she should read, or changes she should make. My son would complain about his job, and I'd send him listings for other positions before we'd even hung up the phone. I thought I was being helpful. I thought that's what a good father does. But I've learned that most of the time, people don't need solutions. They need to vent. They need to process. They need time. That marriage my daughter was upset about, they worked through it. It took them about 6 months, and they're fine now. My son's job situation? He ended up getting a promotion 3 months after that conversation, and he loves it now. In both cases, if I'd pushed my solutions, I would have caused more harm than good. I would have added pressure when they needed space. I would have made their problems about me instead of about them. My mother was a master at this. I remember once when I was going through a terrible time at work. My boss was impossible, my coworkers were backstabbing each other, and I was miserable. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday and sat at their kitchen table for 2 hours, just complaining. My mother made me lunch, refilled my coffee, and mostly just listened. At one point I said, "Mom, what should I do?" And she said, "Well, honey, what do you think you should do?" I was so frustrated. I wanted her to tell me to quit, or to fight back, or something. But she just asked me what I thought. And you know what? By the time I left their house, I'd talked myself into a solution. I didn't even realize she'd done that on purpose until years later. Now I do the same thing. When someone comes to me with a problem, my first instinct is to listen and wait. 9 times out of 10, they figure it out on their own. And even if they don't, even if the problem gets worse before it gets better, it's their problem to solve, not mine. That's not coldness. That's respect. That's trusting that other people are capable of handling their own lives. Here's the 4th thing, and this one might be the most important. You learn what actually matters, and it's a much shorter list than you think. When you're young, everything feels important. Every slight, every disappointment, every disagreement feels like it matters. You're building your identity, proving yourself, trying to control how the world sees you. So you talk a lot, you defend yourself, you argue, you explain, you make sure everyone knows where you stand on everything. But then you get older, and people close to you start dying. Friends, siblings, sometimes even your own children if you're unlucky. And when you're standing at their funeral, you never once think, "I wish we'd argued more about politics." You never think, "I'm so glad I corrected them that time they got a fact wrong." You think about the last time you laughed together. You think about whether they knew you loved them. You think about all the time you wasted on things that didn't matter. I lost my brother Michael 3 years ago. He was 68, heart attack, completely unexpected. And the last real conversation we'd had, about 2 months before he died, we'd gotten into this stupid argument about whether the economy was getting better or worse. We both got heated. We both said things that were a little sharp. We smoothed it over before we hung up, but it wasn't a great conversation. And now he's gone, and I'd give anything to have that hour back. I'd give anything to have spent it asking him about his grandkids, or sharing a memory from our childhood, or just telling him I love him. That experience changed me. It made me realize that I've got limited time left, and I don't want to waste it on things that don't matter. Arguments about politics don't matter. Being right about some trivial fact doesn't matter. Winning a disagreement about the best way to cook a roast doesn't matter. What matters is connection. What matters is love. What matters is being present with the people you care about while you still can. So now, when I'm in a conversation and I feel that old urge to correct someone or argue or prove my point, I ask myself a question. If this person dies tomorrow, will I be glad I said this? And 99 times out of 100, the answer is no. So I stay quiet. I smile. I let it go. Not because I don't have opinions anymore, but because I finally learned what's worth spending my breath on. The fifth thing I've learned is that silence is its own kind of communication. This is something my parents understood that I didn't. When I was young, I thought if you weren't talking, you weren't connecting. I thought love and care had to be expressed through words, through advice, through constant engagement. But there's a whole language that happens in silence, and it's often more powerful than words. When my father would sit with me on the porch in the evening, not saying much, just being there, that was communication. When my mother would pat my hand while I was upset, not offering solutions, just acknowledging my pain, that was communication. They were saying, "I'm here. You're not alone. I trust you. I love you." But I was too young to hear it. Now I understand. Some of my most meaningful moments with my own children happen in silence. My daughter came over a few months ago, clearly upset about something, and we just sat in my living room together. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't try to fix it. I just made her a cup of tea and sat with her. After about 20 minutes, she took a deep breath and said, "Thanks, Dad. I needed this." She never told me what was bothering her, and I never asked. But something important happened in that silence. She felt supported. She felt loved. She felt less alone. There's a weight to silence when it comes from someone who's chosen it, who could speak but decides not to. It's different from the silence of someone who doesn't care or isn't paying attention. It's a thoughtful silence. It's a silence that says, "I'm confident enough in our relationship that I don't need to fill every moment with words. I'm secure enough in my love for you that I don't need to prove it constantly. I trust you enough that I don't need to manage or control you." My parents gave me that gift, and I didn't recognize it until I was old enough to give it to others. Now it's one of the most valuable things I have to offer. My presence without my interference, my love without my control, my support without my solutions. The sixth thing, and this is a hard one to admit, is that you get tired. Not just physically, though that's true too, but emotionally tired. Tired of conflict, tired of trying to change people's minds, tired of defending yourself, tired of proving things. When you're young, you have energy for all of that. You can stay up until 2 in the morning, arguing about something you'll barely remember in a year. You can invest hours trying to convince someone of something they're determined not to believe. You can expend enormous emotional energy on conflicts that ultimately don't change anything. But at 70, I don't have that energy anymore. And more importantly, I don't want to spend my remaining energy on that. Every argument I have, every conflict I engage in, every time I defend myself or try to change someone's mind, that's energy I'm not spending on things I actually care about. That's energy I could be spending on a conversation with my granddaughter. That's energy I could be spending on my garden, or on reading a book that brings me joy, or on sitting quietly with my wife. There's a ruthlessness that comes with aging, in a good way. You become ruthless about protecting your peace. You become ruthless about not wasting your limited time and energy on nonsense. Not because you're mean, but because you finally learned that your life is yours, and you get to decide what deserves your attention. I have a neighbor, Margaret, who's 76. Lovely woman. Her daughter is always trying to start drama, always coming over with complaints about other family members, trying to pull Margaret into conflicts. And Margaret has perfected this response. She just says, that sounds difficult, and then changes the subject. Every single time. Her daughter gets frustrated sometimes, wants Margaret to take sides, to get involved. But Margaret won't do it. She told me once, "I'm too old for other people's drama. I've got my own life to live." I admire that so much. The seventh and final thing I've learned is probably the most profound. Some people aren't ready to hear what you have to say, and that's okay. This is the hardest lesson because it requires you to accept that you can't help everyone, even people you love, especially people you love. I spent years trying to share what I'd learned with my kids when they were in their 20s and 30s. I'd see them making mistakes I'd made, heading down paths I knew were difficult, and I'd try to warn them. I'd try to share my wisdom, to spare them the pain I'd been through, and they'd nod politely and then do exactly what they were going to do anyway. It used to hurt my feelings. I thought they didn't respect me, didn't value my experience. But I understand now. They weren't ready, just like I wasn't ready when my parents tried to tell me things. There are some lessons you can only learn through experience. There are some truths that don't mean anything until you've lived them yourself. My father could have sat me down at 25 and explained everything I'm telling you right now, and I would have thought I understood. But I wouldn't have. Not really. Because wisdom isn't just intellectual knowledge. It's knowledge that's been earned through experience, through pain, through years of living. So now, when I see my children or my grandchildren heading towards something I know is going to be hard, I mostly stay quiet. Not because I don't care, but because I've learned that my words won't change anything. They need to live it themselves. They need to make their own mistakes and draw their own conclusions. And when they're ready, when they've been through enough to actually hear what I have to say, they'll ask, and then I'll share, but not before. There's a story I love that I think illustrates this perfectly. A young man was walking through the woods with his grandfather, and they came across a cocoon hanging from a tree branch. The young man could see the butterfly inside struggling to break free. He watched for a few minutes, growing more and more distressed at how hard the butterfly was working. Finally, he said to his grandfather, "Should we help it? It's suffering." And the grandfather said, "No, if you help it out of the cocoon, its wings won't develop properly. The struggle is what makes it strong enough to fly. If you spare it the struggle, you doom it." That's what I think about now when I'm tempted to rescue someone from a difficulty they need to go through. So here I am at 70, finally understanding why my parents were so quiet. It wasn't apathy. It wasn't disconnection. It wasn't that they'd given up on life or stopped caring about me. It was wisdom. It was restraint. It was love expressed in a way I was too young to recognize. And you know what's strange? Now that I understand it, now that I've become quiet in the same ways they were, I feel closer to them than I did when they were alive. I feel like I'm finally walking in their shoes, seeing the world through their eyes. I understand the self-control it took to let me make my own mistakes. I understand the love it took to support me without controlling me. I understand the wisdom it took to know when to speak and when to stay silent. I wish I could go back and thank them. I wish I could tell my father that I finally get why he just shrugged when I asked him for advice. I wish I could tell my mother that her quiet presence meant more than I ever acknowledged. But they're both gone now. The best I can do is pass on what they taught me, even though they taught me mostly through silence. If you're watching this, and you're around my age, maybe you've noticed this shift in yourself too. Maybe you've become quieter and wondered if something was wrong with you. Let me assure you, nothing is wrong. You're not checking out. You're not giving up. You're growing into a wisdom that can only come with decades of living. You're learning what matters and what doesn't. You're learning to protect your peace. You're learning that silence can be the most loving response. And if you're watching this and you're younger, maybe in your 40s or 50s, and you're frustrated with your aging parents because they don't engage the way they used to, maybe this gives you a different perspective. Maybe your father's shrug isn't indifference. Maybe your mother's isn't dismissal. Maybe they're giving you something more valuable than advice. Maybe they're giving you the space to become who you're meant to be. I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. This was a vulnerable topic for me to discuss, because it touches on something I'm still learning about myself, still discovering as I navigate this stage of life. If this resonated with you, I'd encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe a friend your age who's going through the same shift. Maybe an adult child who's frustrated with your quietness. Maybe someone who's grieving the loss of quiet parents and needs to understand what that silence meant. And if you found value in this conversation, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel. I'm here every week sharing honest thoughts about aging, about life at 70, about the things nobody warns you about when you get older. This is a community of people who understand that getting older isn't just about loss. It's also about gaining things, wisdom, peace, perspective, and yes, sometimes a comfortable silence. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, if you're finding yourself quieter these days, that's not a weakness. That might just be wisdom finally catching up with you.